All right, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're tackling a story that's got it all. A
Yeah,
presidential showdown, a state that stand of its ground, and a whole lot of controversies.
absolutely.
Swirling around the topic of transgender athletes in school sports,
Yeah.
you sent over a really interesting mix of articles for this one from the New York Post, Politico, AP News.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like we're going deep on this one.
Oh, yeah.
And your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to cut through all the noise
That's right.
and really understand what's at stake beyond just the headlines.
Absolutely. Yeah, because on the surface, it looks like a story about sports, but it's so much more than that.
Right.
When you start to peel back the layers, it's really about power. You know, who has it, who's trying to wield it, and who gets caught in the crossfire.
Well, let's start with the power play that kicked this whole thing off.
Yeah.
Right? A National Governors Association meeting, President Trump's in the room,
Uh-huh.
and he singles out Maine's Governor Janet Mills, a Democrat,
Right.
over her state's policies on transgender athletes, and he basically throws down the gauntlet.
Yeah.
Follow my executive order or say goodbye to federal funding for your schools.
And what's so striking is that Governor Mills doesn't even flinch. She's very calm.
Right.
She asserts that Maine is following the law, both state and federal. But then Trump kind of doubles down and declares we are the federal law, and he even predicts this will be the end of her political career.
Wow.
So, you know, whether it's bravado or a genuine belief, it really highlights the tension of this whole thing.
Yeah, her response was pretty epic.
Oh,
She said,
yeah.
we'll see you in court.
I love
You
that.
got to admire that kind of backbone.
It's a pivotal moment because it reveals this deeper conflict at play. You know, this isn't just about transgender athletes. It's about federal authority versus state autonomy. It's about a presidential administration using funding, which is essentially the lifeblood of state education systems, to impose a social agenda. Imagine being a school administrator in Maine at that moment.
Oh, my gosh.
Millions of dollars are hanging in the balance because of this political standoff.
Okay, so let's break down this executive order that's at the heart of the controversy.
Okay.
It essentially bans transgender women from competing in girls' and women's sports.
Right.
And the administration is justifying this using Title IX,
Yeah.
which, ironically, was designed to protect women in sports.
Right, and this is where it gets really tricky. Title IX was enacted in 1972.
Okay.
And it's been so instrumental in leveling the playing field for women in education and athletics. It prohibits sex-based discrimination in any school or educational program that receives federal funding.
Yeah.
The Trump administration argues that allowing transgender girls to compete violates Title IX
Interesting.
by creating an unfair advantage for them and displacing cisgender girls. They say it goes against the original intent of Title IX.
But critics argue that the Trump administration is twisting the meaning of Title IX to fit a specific political agenda.
Right.
They say that excluding transgender girls from sports based on their gender identity
Oh.
is discriminatory and goes against the very spirit of inclusion that Title IX is meant to uphold.
And this is where the legal battle really heats up because the Department of Education, under the Trump administration, launches an investigation into Maine's policies,
Wow.
putting a staggering $250 million
Oh, my God.
in annual federal funding at risk. And it's not just Maine. We're seeing similar investigations in Minnesota and California, suggesting this is a coordinated effort to reshape the landscape of transgender rights in education nationwide.
So we've got this high-stakes political chess match happening, but there's a real human story at the center of it all.
Right.
We need to talk about Katie.
Yes. Katie's story is crucial to understanding how this debate is playing out on a personal level.
Okay.
She's the transgender student-athlete who won the Maine Class B girls state championship in pole vaulting, and her victory essentially ignited this entire firestorm.
So she wins this championship, and suddenly she's at the center of a national controversy.
Yeah.
It's wild how one event can become such a flashpoint.
And what's especially interesting is that her win wasn't just a win, it was a dominant one.
Right.
She cleared 10 feet 6 inches, a full 6 inches above the second-place finisher.
Wow.
Her team went on to win the overall state championship.
Incredible.
It was a moment of celebration, of achievement, of teamwork.
Yeah.
But then Republican state rep Laurel Libby brings national attention to Katie's victory, and it becomes fuel for this political debate over transgender athletes.
So this raises a whole host of complicated questions, right?
Yeah.
How do we define fairness in the context of evolving understandings of gender? Where's the line between inclusion and what some might consider an unfair advantage?
Exactly. Katie's story forces us to grapple with some really complex issues. We have to consider the science of biology, the fluidity of gender identity,
Right.
and the social and ethical implications of creating truly inclusive policies.
And Maine's not backing down.
Nope.
Governor Mills and the state's Attorney General Aaron Frey have vowed to fight this investigation tooth and nail.
Uh-huh.
They're calling it political retaliation, and they're arguing that the Trump administration is exceeding its authority.
This is where the legal and constitutional arguments get fascinating.
Yeah.
Can a president unilaterally withhold funding that's been authorized by Congress?
Right.
And if he can, what does that mean for the balance of power between the federal government and individual states? Does it set a dangerous precedent for future conflicts?
Now, Jonathan Chait, writing in The Atlantic, takes this argument even further. He suggests that Trump's actions represent a blatant disregard for the rule of law and could even lead to a constitutional crisis. He's basically arguing that Trump is exceeding the bounds of executive power and trying to rule by decree.
And that's a chilling thought.
It is.
Right? Imagine a president using federal funding as a weapon to force states to conform to his personal ideology.
Right.
It raises serious questions about the checks and balances that are supposed to safeguard our democracy.
So we've got this high-stakes legal battle, a political showdown, and a complex human story all intertwined.
Yeah.
But we need to hear from the people at the heart of this controversy.
Absolutely.
What are supporters of the executive order saying? What are the concerns of the LGBTQ+ community?
Let's delve into those perspectives next, because understanding those different viewpoints is critical to grasping the full complexity of this issue. So supporters of the executive order, we see this reflected in a lot of the articles you sent. They argue that allowing transgender women to compete in girls' sports creates an uneven playing field.
Okay.
They're concerned about fairness for its-gender female athletes.
Right.
They worry that transgender women might have a physical advantage due to biological differences.
Yeah.
And they fear that talented female athletes could be displaced from opportunities, roster spots, scholarships, even chances to win by transgender athletes.
It's understandable why those concerns exist. I mean, in sports, especially at the elite level, even fractions of a second or an inch can make all the difference.
Yeah. And
these aren't just hypothetical worries. Katie's case, where she outperformed her competitors by a significant margin, is often cited as proof that these concerns are valid.
Right, and it's important to acknowledge that these concerns are often rooted in a genuine desire to protect women's sports and ensure fair competition.
Yeah.
Title IX, as we discussed, was born out of a need to address those historical inequities that women have faced in athletics, and some see this as a continuation of that fight.
But on the other side of this debate, we hear really powerful voices from the LGBTQ+ community.
Absolutely.
And their perspective is equally crucial to understanding what's at stake.
Yeah.
What are they saying about this executive order and its potential impact?
So LGBTQ+ advocates and transgender athletes in particular are condemning this executive order as discriminatory and deeply harmful.
Right.
They argue that it's not just about sports. It sends a dangerous message to transgender youth that they are not fully accepted or valued by society.
That's a really powerful point. We're talking about kids who are already facing significant challenges, including higher rates of bullying, depression, and even suicide. And to tell them that they can't compete in sports consistent with their gender identity.
Right.
Something that could be so crucial for their physical and emotional well-being seems incredibly insensitive.
It's about more than just playing on a team. It's about being seen, being affirmed, being part of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
And for many, transgender youth sports can provide that sense of belonging, that validation of their identity.
Right.
To take that away can be devastating.
Reading through these articles, I was struck by a quote from Chase Rangio, a lawyer with the ACLU who's representing transgender athletes.
Okay.
He says this isn't just about sports. This is about erasing trans people from public life.
Wow.
It really highlights the fear that many in the transgender community are feeling right now.
And that fear is compounded by a broader context.
Right.
We're seeing this surge in legislation targeting transgender rights across the country. Bathroom bills, restrictions on healthcare, and now this attack on their participation in sports. It creates the sense that their very existence is being challenged.
So how do we navigate this incredibly sensitive and complex terrain?
Right.
We've got legitimate concerns about fairness in competition, but also the fundamental rights and well-being of transgender athletes.
That's the challenge we face as a society, isn't it? How do we find that balance, that sweet spot where we're creating inclusive and equitable policies without undermining the integrity of women's sports? And this isn't just a question for policymakers and lawmakers. This is a conversation we need to be having in our communities, in our schools, even around our dinner tables.
And I think the key to having those conversations productively is to approach them with empathy.
Absolutely.
To really listen to the perspectives of people who might have different experiences than our own. And to remember that we're not just talking about abstract ideas. We're talking about the lives of real people, especially young people who are trying to figure out who they are and where they belong.
I completely agree. And that's something that often gets lost in these heated debates.
Yeah,
We tend to focus on the political and legal arguments,
right,
but we can't forget the human cost.
right.
We need to remember that these are real people with real feelings, and our words and actions have consequences.
I keep coming back to Katie's story.
Yeah,
She wasn't trying to make a political statement. She was just trying to be herself to excel in a sport she loves.
right.
And now her victory has become a symbol in a much larger battle.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you wonder, what kind of message are we sending to young people like Katie when their joy, their success, is used to justify policies that could ultimately exclude them from participating at all?
It raises a lot of uncomfortable questions, doesn't it? And those are questions we need to be asking ourselves.
Right,
What does fairness really mean?
right.
What does inclusion look like in practice?
Hmm.
And how do we create a society where everyone, regardless of their gender identity, feels valued and respected?
As this issue heads to the courts, it's not just lawyers and judges who will be wrestling with these questions.
Right.
We, as a society, need to grapple with them as well.
Absolutely.
The outcome of these legal challenges will have far-reaching implications for transgender rights, not just in sports, but in all aspects of life.
And those implications will be felt most acutely by transgender people themselves.
Right.
They'll be the ones living with the consequences of these decisions, for better or worse.
So it's not just about following the legal arguments or the political maneuvering.
No.
It's about understanding the lived experiences of transgender people, their hopes, their fears, their aspirations, and it's about recognizing that their fight for equality is a fight that affects us all.
That's such an important point. The transgender rights are human rights,
Yeah.
and they're inextricably linked to the fight for social justice and equality for all marginalized groups.
Wow, it feels like we've only just scratched the surface of this issue.
Yeah, it's really complex.
But I think we've managed to unpack some of the key players, the legal battles, and the very different perspectives at play.
Absolutely. It's a multi-layered story with no easy answers.
Right.
And we've seen how something as seemingly straightforward as, school sports can become a battleground for these much larger cultural and political conflicts.
What really struck me as we went through these articles is how much this debate boils down to different interpretations of fairness.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have those who believe that biological differences between men and women should be the defining factor in athletic competition.
Right.
On the other hand, you have those who believe that gender identity is the more relevant consideration, and that excluding transgender athletes based on their assigned sex at birth is inherently unfair.
And that tension between those two viewpoints is at the heart of this legal battle over Title IX.
Yeah.
Is it about protecting a level playing field based solely on biological differences, or is it about ensuring equal opportunities for all students regardless of their gender identity?
It's like we're trying to solve a complex equation with too many variables.
Yeah.
How do you balance the concerns of cisgender female athletes with the rights of transgender athletes?
Right.
How do you create policies that are both inclusive and equitable? It's a real head-scratcher.
And I think that's why this issue is so challenging. It forces us to confront our own assumptions about gender, about fairness, about the role of government in regulating our personal lives.
Right.
There are no simple solutions.
Yeah.
And any attempt to find a resolution will inevitably involve compromise and difficult conversations.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious to get your thoughts on what the future holds for transgender athletes.
Yeah.
These legal challenges are making their way through the courts, and the outcomes could have a significant impact on how this issue plays out in schools and communities across the country.
It's hard to predict with certainty what the courts will decide, but I think it's safe to say that this debate is far from over.
Yeah.
We're likely to see more legal challenges, more legislative battles,
Right.
and continued public debate as society grapples with these complex questions about gender, sports, and equality.
And beyond the legal battles, I think it's crucial that we as individuals continue to educate ourselves about these issues, to listen to the voices of transgender people, and to advocate for policies that are both inclusive and just.
I couldn't agree more. This isn't just a legal or political issue, it's a human rights issue.
Yeah.
And the way we treat transgender people, especially transgender youth, reflects on our values as a society.
This deep dive has definitely left me with more questions than answers, but I think that's a good thing.
I agree.
It sparked my curiosity, and it's made me want to learn more, to engage in these conversations, and to be a part of finding solutions that create a more just and equitable world for everyone.
And that's what these deep dives are all about, encouraging critical thinking, exploring different perspectives, and empowering you, the listener, to continue learning and growing.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those amazing sources coming. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a topic that's shaping our world. Until then, thanks for joining us.